The scent of white lilies was suffocating. They lined every corner of the grand hall, their fragrance clinging to the air like a desperate plea for purity in a room full of wolves. I adjusted the silver pendant at my throat, my mother's last gift before she died, and tried to breathe through my mouth instead. My fingers trembled slightly, causing the delicate chain to rattle against my collarbone. The sound was imperceptible to human ears, but in a room full of heightened senses, it might as well have been a scream. "Stand straighter, Sophia," whispered Maya, my only friend among the palace staff. "Everyone is watching." She wasn't wrong. Though I kept my eyes lowered in the manner expected of an Omega in the royal court, I could feel the weight of their stares, curious, judging, pitying. I was the help, after all. Just another servant tasked with ensuring the royal wedding proceeded without a hitch. Only I carried a secret that threatened to unravel everything. I was the woman King Gabriel had once promised to love until his dying breath, before politics, before duty, before he learned what I truly was. The grand hall of the Black Crest Palace had been transformed into something from a winter fairy tale. Crystalline chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across marble floors, so polished they reflected the faces of 400 guests in distorted miniature. The nobles preened in their finery, a sea of silks and jewels that represented the 7 wolf packs of our divided nation. They had come to witness the union that would finally bring peace, the marriage of their Alpha King to Lady Vivian Silverclaw, daughter of his greatest former enemy. I swallowed hard against the knot in my throat. 2 years ago, I had been plain Sophia Winters, a palace historian with no pack allegiance, no status, and no remarkable qualities except for my research skills and, as Gabriel once whispered against my hair, my uncanny ability to see the man beneath the crown. For 6 beautiful months, I'd been his secret solace, the one place where he could shed the weight of kingship and simply exist as a man. Then came the night of the winter solstice ball. The night he'd promised to announce our engagement, politics be damned. The night his royal advisor discovered what I had successfully hidden my entire life. I wasn't just a packless nobody. I was an Omega, the rarest designation in our kind, gifted with the ability to soothe even the most savage alpha rage, to bring harmony to packs, to bear the strongest children. I was a prize to be bartered, not a woman to be loved for her mind. The revelation changed everything. By morning, I had been stripped of my historian title and reassigned to the domestic staff. By evening, Gabriel had stopped responding to my desperate notes, and within a week, the palace announced his strategic engagement to Lady Vivian, whose alpha bloodline was impeccable and whose father commanded the largest army in the realm. I'd spent 2 years buried in the shadows of the palace, becoming invisible as only the broken-hearted can, until today, when some cruel twist of fate had assigned me to serve at the very wedding that would forever seal my exclusion from the life I'd almost had. The low, resonant hum of ceremonial drums pulled me from my thoughts. The guests collectively inhaled, straightening as the massive ironwood doors at the far end of the hall began to swing open. The Alpha King was arriving. "He looks magnificent," breathed Maya, her eyes wide with the same reverence everyone showed in Gabriel's presence. And he did. Even from across the vast hall, King Gabriel Blackthorn was everything an alpha ruler should be. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the contained power of an apex predator. His ceremonial armor gleamed obsidian against the snowy backdrop of his formal cloak, the metal etched with the ancient symbols of all 7 packs, a visible reminder of his promise to unite rather than conquer. His dark hair, usually tied back in battle, fell loose today around a face that had launched 1,000 court intrigues. Strong jaw, aristocratic nose, and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. Those eyes that once looked at me like I held all the answers in the universe. He walked the length of the hall flanked by his inner circle, his beta general, his gamma strategist, his delta healer, the perfect court for the perfect king. Nobles bowed deeply as he passed, some tilting their heads to expose their throats in the ancient gesture of wolf submission. Gabriel acknowledged them with the barest nod, his expression unreadable, until his gaze swept the servants' line where I stood. For a heartbeat, time suspended. His stride faltered, just a microsecond, unnoticeable to anyone who hadn't spent hours memorizing his every movement. His nostrils flared slightly, and I knew with sick certainty that despite the cloying lilies, despite the perfumes and incense, he had caught my scent. The bond between Alpha and Omega was biological, primal, impossible to fully sever. Then his eyes locked with mine, and the carefully neutral mask he wore for his subjects slipped. Pain flashed across his features, raw and unfiltered, before being swallowed by something darker. Something that made my heart stutter in my chest. Rage. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several courtiers near him instinctively stepped back, responding to the waves of anger suddenly emanating from their king. The air grew thick with tension, with unsaid things, with the dangerous pheromones of an alpha on the edge of losing control. I should have looked away. Protocol demanded it. Self-preservation screamed for it. Instead, I held his gaze, letting him see what I could no longer hide, the love that had never died, the betrayal that still burned like acid in my veins, the quiet dignity I'd managed to salvage from the wreckage he'd made of my heart. "Sophia," Maya hissed in warning, her fingers digging into my arm. "Lower your eyes before someone notices." Too late. His gamma, Lord Reed, had already tracked Gabriel's stare to its source. His shrewd eyes narrowed as he leaned in to whisper something to the king. Gabriel's jaw tightened, the muscle there jumping as he clenched his teeth. Then, with visible effort, he tore his gaze from mine and continued his procession to the altar where the high priestess waited to bind him to another. I exhaled shakily, suddenly aware that I'd been holding my breath. Around me, the other servants exchanged puzzled glances. They hadn't missed the strange interaction, even if they couldn't understand its significance. I forced my expression into careful blankness, the way I'd practiced every day since Gabriel had discarded me from his life. "What was that?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the swell of ceremonial music that now filled the hall. "Nothing," I lied. The king would never notice someone like me. The truth was far more dangerous. For in that brief exchange of glances, I'd seen not just anger at my presence, but recognition of what still simmered between us. And something else. Something that sent ice water flooding through my veins. Fear. Gabriel Blackthorn, the most powerful alpha in 7 generations. The undefeated warrior king who had brought warring packs to heel through sheer force of will, was afraid. Of me? Of what I represented, or of the feelings he couldn't seem to extinguish. The trumpets blared, announcing the arrival of his bride. The guests turned as one toward the southern entrance where Lady Vivian would make her appearance. Only Gabriel remained facing forward, his shoulders rigid with tension, his hands clasped so tightly behind his back that his knuckles shone white against tanned skin. And in that moment of universal distraction, he did the unthinkable. He turned his head, just slightly, and looked back at me over his shoulder. His lips moved, forming words meant for my eyes alone. "Why are you here?" The question struck me like a physical blow. Why was I here? Because I had no choice. Because after he cast me aside, I had nowhere else to go. Because some masochistic part of me needed to witness the end of hope with my own eyes before I could truly begin to heal. I gave him the slightest shrug, a gesture that conveyed both helplessness and defiance. His eyes darkened, and for a second, I glimpsed the wolf that lived beneath his human skin, the apex predator that would tear apart anything that threatened what belonged to him. But I no longer belonged to him. That was the point of today's ceremony. A collective gasp pulled our attention back to the moment. Lady Vivian had appeared at the far end of the hall, and even I had to admit she made a stunning bride. Her gown was a masterpiece of silver and white, embroidered with the symbols of both her birth pack and the royal house she was about to join. Her red gold hair was piled high and crowned with a diamond tiara that caught the light with every graceful step. Beautiful, powerful, politically perfect. Everything I could never be. Gabriel turned to face his bride, his back now to me. His posture once again the very image of regal composure. The high priestess began the ancient words that would bind alpha to alpha in the sacred marriage bond, her voice carrying to every corner of the hushed hall. I should have looked away, should have focused on my duties, on surviving this day with my dignity intact. Instead, I watched as Lady Vivian processed toward the man who had once been mine, and I allowed myself to feel every jagged shard of pain. That's when I noticed it. The barely perceptible tremor in Gabriel's right hand, the hand extended toward his approaching bride. To anyone else, it might appear as wedding nerves, but I knew better. It was the same tremor I'd seen the night he'd first kissed me, when emotion had overwhelmed his legendary control. The royal advisor, standing just behind Gabriel, noticed it too. Lord Thorne, the cold-eyed beta who had orchestrated my removal from Gabriel's life, leaned forward to whisper something urgent in the king's ear. Gabriel's spine stiffened even further, if such a thing were possible, and the tremor vanished as he clenched his hand into a fist, before relaxing it again. Lady Vivian reached the altar steps, her practiced smile never faltering as she took Gabriel's offered hand. The high priestess raised her arms, calling upon ancient powers to witness the union. The ceremony was reaching its apex, the moment when the binding would become irrevocable. And that's when it happened. A commotion at the rear of the hall. Shouts, the sound of running feet. Gabriel's head snapped up, his body automatically moving to place himself between his bride and potential danger. The guests turned in confusion as royal guards rushed to intercept something, or someone. "The castle is under attack," a voice cried from somewhere near the entrance. Chaos erupted. Nobles scrambled from their seats, some shifting partially to their wolf forms in panic. Gabriel's military commanders converged around him, creating a protective circle as they awaited orders. Through the confusion, I alone saw the truth in Gabriel's eyes. Not concern for his bride or kingdom, but terrible, devastating relief. The wedding had been interrupted, the binding remained incomplete. And as our eyes met once more across the churning sea of panicked guests, I realized with absolute certainty that whatever game fate had decided to play with us, this was only the opening move. The silver pendant at my throat suddenly felt warm against my skin. My mother's last words whispered through my memory. "Remember, little one, an Omega's greatest power is not in submission, but in the strength to stand when others would have you kneel." Today I had stood, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few minutes dissolved into controlled chaos. Royal guards flooded the hall, their black uniforms forming a protective perimeter around the nobles as they escorted them to safety. Gabriel's inner circle had immediately surrounded him and Lady Vivian, whisking them toward a hidden passage behind the ceremonial altar, one of many secret routes designed for the royal family's escape during attacks. "All domestic staff to the eastern kitchens," barked the head steward, his normally composed face tight with stress. "Now!" Maya grabbed my arm, pulling me into the stream of servants hurrying toward the service corridors. I moved automatically, my mind still replaying that final look Gabriel had given me, that flash of naked relief that had slipped through his careful mask. "Sophia, hurry," Maya urged, her fingers digging into my arm. "Something's very wrong." Something was indeed wrong, but not in the way everyone assumed. In my 3 years at the palace, first as a historian, then as a servant, I had participated in countless security drills. This felt different. The guards moved with purpose, but without the urgency of genuine danger. No howls of injured wolves echoed through the halls. No scent of blood tainted the air. This wasn't an attack. This was a diversion. The realization stopped me in my tracks. Maya tugged at my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "I need to get something from the library," I said, the lie sliding easily from my lips. "My mother's journal. I can't lose it if there's a true threat." "Are you insane? We need to—" "Go ahead," I told her, gently extracting myself from her grip. "I'll catch up, I promise." Before she could protest further, I slipped into a side corridor, one that would eventually lead toward the royal quarters rather than away from them. Years spent poring over ancient palace blueprints during my historian days had left me with intimate knowledge of the castle's labyrinthine passages, knowledge that now propelled me not toward safety, but toward answers. The corridor was deserted, everyone having fled toward designated shelter areas. I moved swiftly, gathering my long servant skirts to avoid tripping, my soft-soled shoes silent against the stone floors. At the first junction, I paused, listening intently with my enhanced Omega senses. Distant shouting came from the south wing. The thundering of boots echoed from the main hall. But ahead, in the direction of the king's private study, all was quiet. Too quiet. I hesitated only a moment before continuing forward. What I was doing was beyond foolish. If caught, I would face punishment far worse than dismissal. But the memory of Gabriel's face, of that flash of relief, drove me onward. After 2 years of carefully constructed numbness, I needed to understand. The corridor widened as I approached the royal wing, the stone walls giving way to rich wood paneling and plush carpets that muffled my footsteps. I slowed, pressing myself against the wall at each corner, listening before proceeding. The guards who normally patrolled these halls were conspicuously absent, drawn away by the commotion, no doubt. When I finally reached the ornate double doors of Gabriel's study, I paused, my heart hammering so loudly I feared it would give me away. This room had once been a sanctuary for us both, the place where, under the pretense of historical research, our relationship had blossomed from intellectual respect to something far more profound. I had not set foot in it since the day Lord Thorn had discovered my Omega status and orchestrated my banishment from Gabriel's life. I pressed my ear against the polished wood, holding my breath. At first, nothing. Then, voices. Angry, urgent, pitched low but intensifying with each exchange. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized Gabriel's deep baritone immediately. The other voice belonged to Lord Thorn. Carefully, I tested the handle. Locked. Of course it would be. I bit my lip, weighing my options. The logical part of me screamed to retreat, to return to the safety of anonymity among the domestic staff. But something stronger, something primal and irrevocable, kept me rooted to the spot. I closed my eyes, concentrating on the small, ornamental vent near the floor, a relic from the castle's original heating system, now purely decorative in most rooms. But in the study, it connected to the old air shafts. I knelt, pressing my ear against the metalwork, and suddenly the voices inside clarified as if by magic. "Cannot believe the timing," Lord Thorn was saying. His normally smooth voice stretched thin with tension. 2 years of negotiations, 7 packs finally aligned, and now this. It wasn't an attack. Gabriel's voice was cold, controlled. "Tell me what really happened, Thorn." A pause, heavy with unspoken things. "A messenger arrived from the northern border," Thorn finally said. "The Moonstone Pack is mobilizing, gathering forces. Our scouts estimate nearly 300 warriors moving south toward the capital." "The Moonstones have been neutral for generations," Gabriel replied, skepticism evident in his tone. "Why would they mobilize now, on this day of all days? Perhaps because they learned of a certain Omega's presence at your wedding." My blood froze in my veins. Were they talking about me? "Don't play games, Thorn." Gabriel's voice had dropped dangerously low. "Sophia has been here for 2 years. If the Moonstones wanted her, they've had ample time to make their move. They were talking about me, but why would an entire pack mobilize over my presence? I was nobody. Packless, parentless, powerless. Not Sophia. Thorn's voice dripped with impatience. The other Omega. The one who was sighted crossing our borders 3 days ago, traveling under Moonstone protection. Another Omega? My mind raced. Our kind were vanishingly rare. I had never met another in my 25 years of life. The revelation that another existed and was somehow connected to Gabriel left me reeling. "There is no other Omega," Gabriel growled, and I heard something crash, his fist against his desk, most likely. "There is only Sophia. There has only ever been Sophia." My heart stuttered at his words, at the raw emotion behind them. "Your Majesty." Thorn's voice had taken on a placating tone that made my skin crawl. "I understand this is difficult, but the reports are clear. The woman traveling with the Moonstone delegation matches the description perfectly. Pale blonde hair, green eyes. So do 1,000 other women." Gabriel cut in. "And she carries the royal insignia of the Lost Pack, the same insignia that was said to be in the possession of your childhood betrothed." Silence fell, so complete I could hear my own shallow breathing. The Lost Pack? Royal insignia? Childhood betrothed? None of this made sense. Gabriel had never mentioned being betrothed before me. When he finally spoke again, his voice was different, hollow, almost haunted. "Isabel died in the purge. Her entire family, her entire pack was massacred. I saw the evidence myself. Apparently not, Thorn replied dryly, unless someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create a very convincing imposter. Either way, the Moonstones believe they're escorting the last surviving royal of the Lost Pack, an Omega, no less, to claim what is rightfully hers, which is what, exactly? You, Your Majesty. Thorn's voice was grim. According to ancient law, a betrothal contract sealed between two royal lines supersedes all subsequent arrangements if both parties still live. If this woman truly is Isabel, and if she still possesses proof of the betrothal, your marriage to Lady Vivian would be rendered invalid before it even began. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling a gasp. The political implications were staggering. The alliance with the Silverclaws would collapse. The fragile peace Gabriel had spent years constructing would shatter overnight. The timing is too convenient, Gabriel said after a long pause. The Moonstones wait until the exact day of my wedding to reveal this supposed survivor, after 15 years of silence? Perhaps they've been waiting for the right moment to maximize their leverage, Thorn suggested. Or perhaps they only recently discovered her themselves. Either way, we must act quickly. Lady Vivian is already demanding answers, and her father's forces are growing restless in the eastern courtyard. I heard footsteps pacing the length of the study, Gabriel's habit when deep in thought. Then, abruptly, they stopped. "Where is Sophia now?" he asked, his voice suddenly urgent. The question startled me so much I nearly lost my balance, my hand slipping against the smooth wall. "With the other domestic staff, I presume," Thorn replied, confusion evident in his tone. "Why does that matter at a time like this?" "Because I need to see her." Gabriel's voice had taken on a new quality, something determined, almost desperate. If anyone would recognize an imposter claiming to be from the Lost Pack, it would be Sophia. Her research on the Purge was the most comprehensive study ever compiled. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, this is hardly the time to consult with a servant girl, regardless of her previous academic contributions. We need to—" "Enough!" The word cracked like a whip, followed by the unmistakable sound of a partial shift, the scrape of claws, the deepening of human voice into something more bestial. "You have controlled my life for 2 years, Thorn. You forced me to give up the one person who—" He broke off, struggling for composure. When he continued, his voice was human again but threaded with steel. "Find Sophia. Bring her to me. Now." I backed away from the vent, my mind spinning. I needed to get back to the eastern kitchens before anyone realized I was missing, before Thorn's men came looking for me. But as I turned to retrace my steps, a shadow fell across the corridor. "Eavesdropping is beneath even you, Sophia." Lord Reed, Gabriel's Gamma, stood watching me with arms crossed over his broad chest, his expression unreadable. Unlike Thorn, who had always regarded me with thinly veiled contempt, Reed had treated me with distant courtesy even after my demotion to the domestic staff. But his loyalty to Gabriel was absolute and unquestioned. I straightened, knowing denial was pointless. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." His amber eyes studied me carefully. "You heard about the other Omega." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Is it true? Could she really be—" "That's what we need to determine." Reed glanced at the study door, then back to me. "The king has asked for you, though I suspect you already know that. Lord Thorn won't be pleased." A faint smile touched Reed's lips, there and gone in an instant. "Lord Thorn rarely is when things escape his control. Come." He gestured toward the study door. "His Majesty is waiting." My pulse quickened as Reed rapped sharply on the ornate wood. The voices inside ceased immediately. "Enter," came Gabriel's command. Reed pushed the door open, placing a hand lightly on my back to guide me forward. I stepped into the familiar room, memories washing over me in a dizzying wave. The massive desk of dark wood, where Gabriel had once spread maps for me to analyze, the wall of books where we'd spent hours debating historical theories. The deep window seat where he'd first kissed me, hesitantly, as if afraid I might shatter beneath his touch. And Gabriel himself, standing tall and imposing before the fireplace, his ceremonial armor discarded, wearing only the simple black tunic and trousers that served as its undergarments. He looked younger without the trappings of kingship, more like the man who had once laughed with me over ancient texts, and fed me berries as we pored over star charts. His eyes found mine instantly, widening with some emotion I couldn't name. For a heartbeat, we simply stared at one another, the air between us charged with 2 years of unspoken words. Lord Thorn stood to one side, his face darkening as he saw me. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded of Reed. "I was just about to send for her." Reed inclined his head slightly. "I happened to encounter Sophia in the corridor and thought it prudent to bring her directly, given the urgency of the situation." Gabriel hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, his eyes still locked on mine. In them, I read confusion, anger, regret, and something else, something that made my heart twist painfully in my chest. Longing. "Sophia," he finally said, my name a caress on his lips despite the formality of his tone. "Thank you for coming." As if I'd had a choice, as if we weren't all pieces in some greater game neither of us fully understood. But I simply lowered my eyes in the proper gesture of respect and said, "How may I serve the crown, Your Majesty?" The room fell silent after my formal greeting. I could feel Gabriel's eyes still on me, searching for something beneath my carefully composed expression. Lord Thorn cleared his throat pointedly, breaking the tense moment. "If we could proceed," he said, his voice tight with barely contained irritation. "Time is of the essence." Gabriel finally looked away from me, turning to face the window with his hands clasped behind his back, a posture I recognized as his way of gathering thoughts before making critical decisions. "Sophia," he said without turning, "what do you know of the Lost Pack?" The question caught me off guard. Despite my eavesdropping, I had expected to be eased into the conversation, not thrown directly into its heart. I straightened my shoulders, instinctively falling into the scholarly tone I'd used during my historian days. "The Lost Pack was one of the original 9 wolf lineages," I began. "Their territory lay in the far northern mountains, largely isolated from the other packs. They were known for their distinctive silver-white fur and exceptional healing abilities. The entire pack, roughly 200 wolves, was presumed massacred during the Purge 15 years ago, when the previous king launched his campaign to eliminate any bloodlines he perceived as threats to his rule." Gabriel nodded slightly. "And their ruling family?" I hesitated, knowing I was stepping onto dangerous ground. The Purge was still a raw wound in our nation's history. The bloody campaign that had eventually led to Gabriel taking the throne from his own father to end the slaughter. "The Moonrose family ruled the Lost Pack for over 8 generations, I continued carefully. "They were unique among royal lines for producing an unusually high number of Omega wolves. The last ruling family consisted of King Alistair, Queen Alara, and their daughter, Princess Isabel, who would have been about 7 years old at the time of the Purge." I paused, then added what I knew would be the most pertinent information. "Historical records indicate that Princess Isabel was betrothed to the Crown Prince of the Blackthorn Pack. To you, Your Majesty, when you were both children. It was an arrangement meant to heal centuries of tension between your bloodlines." Gabriel turned to face me then, his expression unreadable. "And what evidence existed of this betrothal?" Here, I had to tread carefully. This wasn't merely academic history anymore. This was Gabriel's personal past, intertwined with present political machinations. "According to the royal archives, twin ceremonial medallions were created to seal the betrothal," I said. "One bearing the Blackthorn crest, one bearing the Moonrose emblem. They were enchanted by pack mystics so that each would grow warm in the presence of the other, a symbol of the bond that would eventually unite the bloodlines." Lord Thorn made a dismissive sound. "Children's trinkets, hardly binding legal documents." "On the contrary," I countered, momentarily forgetting my position as I slipped into the academic debate that had once been my passion. "In ancient pack law, physical tokens exchanged in formal betrothal ceremonies carried the weight of blood oaths, particularly between royal lines. If both betrothed parties survived to adulthood and still possessed their tokens, the contract would remain binding unless formally dissolved by mutual agreement." I realized too late that I had spoken out of turn. Lord Thorn's eyes narrowed dangerously. But before he could reprimand me, Gabriel stepped forward. "And what evidence exists that Princess Isabel died in the Purge?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. This was the question that made my pulse quicken. During my research years, I had stumbled across inconsistencies in the official accounts, discrepancies I had been in the process of investigating when my relationship with Gabriel was discovered, and I was removed from my position. The official record states that the entire royal family was killed when their mountain stronghold was burned, I said slowly. Your father's forces recovered bodies matching the descriptions of the king and queen, but I hesitated. But? Gabriel prompted. But Princess Isabel's body was never recovered, I admitted. It was presumed she had perished in the fire, her remains too damaged to identify. However, my research uncovered witness accounts suggesting that a child matching her description was seen being carried away by loyalists during the attack. The room went still. Lord Reed, who had been standing silently by the door, exchanged a significant look with Gabriel. You never shared this information during your time as royal historian, Thorne accused. I lifted my chin slightly. I discovered it shortly before my reassignment. I was still verifying the sources when I lost access to the archives. Gabriel's jaw tightened at the reminder of how abruptly I had been removed from my position and from his life. He paced to his desk and picked up a sealed parchment, breaking it open with a quick twist of his wrists. 3 days ago, a delegation from the Moonstone Pack crossed our northern border, he said, his eyes scanning the message. They travel under a flag of diplomatic immunity, escorting a woman they claim is Princess Isabel Moonrose, the last surviving royal of the Lost Pack and, according to ancient law, my rightful betrothed. My stomach twisted at the confirmation of what I'd overheard. Do they offer proof of her identity? They claim she carries the original Moonrose medallion, Gabriel replied, his eyes meeting mine briefly before looking away, and that she bears the royal birthmark, a crescent moon behind her right ear. Details I had read about but never included in my public research. Few people outside the most dedicated historians would know such specific information about the lost princess. The possibility that this woman might truly be Isabel Moonrose suddenly seemed far more credible. If she is who they claim, I said carefully, her appearance would indeed complicate your marriage to Lady Vivian. It would render it impossible, Gabriel corrected, his voice flat. Ancient pack law supersedes modern political arrangements. If Isabel lives and still possesses her medallion, our childhood betrothal would take precedence over any subsequent engagement. Lord Thorne stepped forward, his face a careful mask of concern. Which is precisely why we must handle this situation delicately. The Silverclaws will view this as a deliberate insult, a manufactured excuse to break the alliance after years of negotiation. They may well declare war, rather than suffer such a public humiliation. While the Moonstones, Reed interjected from his position by the door, clearly believe they're about to regain political power through this union. They've been neutral for generations, neither enemies nor allies. This would dramatically shift the balance of power. I listened to their political calculations with a growing sense of unreality. They spoke of alliances and power shifts, of war and peace hanging in the balance. Yet beneath it all lay a simpler, more personal truth. Gabriel was betrothed to 2 women, and bound by blood oath to a third, me. For though we had never formalized our relationship with public ceremony, we had performed the ancient rite of heart-binding during the single night we'd shared as lovers. A private ritual, known only to us, sealed with whispered promises and mingled blood as the moon reached its zenith. A bond deeper than politics, stronger than royal decrees. A bond he had betrayed when he cast me aside. The Moonstone delegation will reach the capital by tomorrow evening, Gabriel said, interrupting my painful memories. We need to prepare for their arrival and determine whether this woman is truly Isabel. And if she is? I asked quietly. Gabriel's eyes met mine, and in them I saw a storm of emotions he couldn't fully conceal. Then everything changes. Lord Thorne moved to stand between us, effectively breaking our eye contact. Your Majesty, I must insist that we focus on containing the political fallout. Lady Vivian and her father are demanding explanations. We need to assure them that this interruption is merely a temporary delay, not a dissolution of the engagement. You would have me lie to my allies? Gabriel's voice carried a dangerous edge. I would have you wait for confirmation, before potentially destroying a peace 2 years in the making. Thorne countered smoothly. Until we verify this woman's identity, the prudent course is to maintain the status quo. Gabriel's expression hardened. But before he could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the room. At Gabriel's command, the door swung open to reveal his Delta healer, Helena, her normally serene face tight with urgency. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty, but Lady Vivian has collapsed. She's asking for you." Concern flashed across Gabriel's features. Despite everything, he wasn't cruel. He wouldn't wish genuine suffering on the woman he'd agreed to marry, regardless of the political motivations behind their union. "Take me to her," he commanded, already moving toward the door. He paused briefly beside me, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We're not finished, Sophia. Wait for me." It wasn't a request. It was a command from my king, my alpha. And despite everything between us, my Omega instincts responded to the authority in his tone. I nodded slightly, earning a venomous glare from Thorn as Gabriel swept from the room, followed by Helena and Reed. As the door closed behind them, Thorn turned to me, all pretense of civility vanishing from his sharp features. "You should never have been at the wedding," he hissed. "I specifically arranged the domestic rotations to keep you far from the ceremony." I lifted my chin, refusing to cower. The head housekeeper reassigned me this morning, when one of the serving staff fell ill. I had no choice. There are always choices, little Omega. He spat the designation like a slur. Just as there were choices 2 years ago, when you could have gracefully withdrawn from the king's life instead of forcing me to intervene. Anger flared hot in my chest, burning away the careful composure I'd maintained. Intervene? Is that what you call threatening to expose my mother's correspondence with Lost Pack refugees? Blackmailing me into silence? Destroying my career and banishing me to the scullery? Thorn's thin lips curved in a cold smile. I did what was necessary for the kingdom. An orphaned, packless Omega with no political value had no place in the king's bed, much less on his throne. The Blackthorns need the Silverclaw's military might to maintain peace. Your selfish infatuation nearly cost us everything. It wasn't infatuation, I said quietly, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. We performed the heart-binding ritual. We are bound, Lord Thorn, in ways your political machinations can never sever. The color drained from his face. Impossible. The king would never. But he did. I touched the silver pendant at my throat, the one that concealed the small crescent scar over my heart. The physical manifestation of our bond. Whatever game you're playing, whatever control you think you have over him, it will never be complete. Not while I live. Thorn took a menacing step toward me, his hand rising as if to strike, then stopped himself with visible effort. You foolish girl. Do you have any idea what forces you're tampering with? The piece of 7 packs hangs by a thread, and you throw around claims of ancient rituals as if they trump the needs of an entire kingdom. I make no claims on the throne, I replied, holding my ground. I never have. But neither will I pretend the bond between us doesn't exist. Not when you've brought me here to help identify a woman who may have a legitimate claim to Gabriel's hand. Something calculating entered Thorn's gaze. Perhaps that's precisely why you should be involved, he said, his tone shifting abruptly. Your expertise on the Lost Pack is unparalleled, as His Majesty pointed out, and your personal connection might prove useful in ensuring the right outcome for all concerned. I didn't trust his sudden change in demeanor, but before I could respond, the study door opened again. Lord Reed stepped inside, his amber eyes quickly assessing the tension between Thorn and myself. Lady Vivian is resting comfortably, he reported, though his gaze remained on me. A stress reaction, nothing more serious. The king has requested Sophia's presence in the South Tower Library immediately. The South Tower Library, our special place, where Gabriel and I had spent countless hours poring over ancient texts together, where our intellectual partnership had first blossomed into something deeper. The significance of the location wasn't lost on me. Thorn's eyes narrowed. His Majesty should be focusing on reassuring his bride and her father, not secluding himself with a former servant. The king, Reed replied with subtle emphasis, is preparing to meet a delegation that may upend the entire political landscape. He requires Sophia's historical expertise. He turned to me, gesturing toward the door. If you'll come with me. I moved to follow him, but Thorn's cold voice stopped me at the threshold. Remember your place, Sophia. You serve at the pleasure of the crown. a crown that requires stability above all else. Whatever you once shared with Gabriel Blackthorne belongs to the past. For the good of the kingdom, ensure it remains there. I didn't dignify his threat with a response, simply following Reed into the corridor, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a dangerous emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in 2 years, hope. As we walked the familiar path toward the South Tower, Reed maintained a respectful silence. Only when we were far from Thorne's hearing did he speak, his voice low and urgent. "The king never wanted to let you go," he said without preamble. "You should know that, whatever comes next." I stumbled slightly, caught off guard by the unexpected statement. "Lord Reed, Gabriel fought Thorne's decision for weeks," he continued, guiding me up the winding tower stairs. "He only relented when Thorne convinced the council that the Silver Claws would withdraw from peace negotiations if the king's affections were publicly given to an Omega from no recognized pack." "Why are you telling me this now?" Reed paused on the landing, turning to face me directly. "Because everything is about to change, and you need to be prepared. If this woman truly is Isabel Moonrose, she represents not just a prior claim to Gabriel's hand, but the resurrection of a pack long thought extinct. A pack known for producing powerful Omegas like yourself." My mind raced with the implications. If the lost pack could be restored, if Omegas like me could reclaim our rightful place in pack hierarchy instead of being treated as rare commodities to be bartered or hidden away. "He's waiting," Reed said softly, gesturing toward the library door ahead. "And Sophia? Whatever happened between you, whatever still exists between you, tread carefully. There are more lives at stake than just your own." The South Tower Library stood exactly as I remembered it, a circular room lined with ancient texts, illuminated by tall windows that caught the late afternoon sun. The scent of parchment and leather bindings filled the air, mingled with something I had tried so hard to forget. Gabriel's distinctive scent, like pine forests after rain. He stood with his back to the door, examining a weathered map spread across the reading table. The formal attire from the wedding ceremony was gone entirely now. He wore a simple black tunic and trousers that emphasized his warrior's build. Without the trappings of royalty, he looked more like the man who had first captured my heart, the scholar king who valued knowledge as much as strength. Reed cleared his throat softly. "Your Majesty, I've brought Sophia as requested." Gabriel turned, and the full force of his gaze hit me like a physical blow. For 2 years, I had carefully avoided direct eye contact with him, observing protocol and preserving what remained of my shattered heart. Now, with nothing between us but air thick with unspoken words, I felt the bond between us pulse with painful clarity. "Thank you, Reed," Gabriel said, his voice carefully neutral. "Please ensure we're not disturbed." Reed bowed slightly and withdrew, closing the heavy door behind him. The soft click of the latch echoed in the silence between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. What could possibly be said after 2 years of enforced distance, of wounds left to fester in silence? I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, imagined the bitter accusations I would hurl, the dignity with which I would show him exactly what he had thrown away. But now, standing before him, all my carefully constructed speeches dissolved like morning mist. "Your medallion," he finally said, gesturing to the silver pendant at my throat. "You still wear it." My hand instinctively rose to touch the pendant, my mother's last gift. "It's all I have left of her." Gabriel's expression softened slightly. "She would be proud of the woman you've become." The unexpected gentleness in his voice threatened to unravel me. I steeled myself against it, falling back on formality as a shield. "You wished to consult me about the Lost Pack delegation, Your Majesty?" A flash of hurt crossed his features, before his expression settled into something more guarded. "Yes. And no." He gestured to the chairs positioned near the window, our old reading spot. "Please, sit." I hesitated, then moved to perch on the edge of the chair furthest from him. Gabriel remained standing, as if unsure of his welcome in what had once been our shared sanctuary. "The Moonstone delegation will arrive tomorrow," he said, running a hand through his dark hair. A gesture of stress I remembered well. "If their claims are true, if this woman really is Isabel..." Then your marriage to Lady Vivian cannot proceed, I finished for him when he trailed off. And the alliance with the Silver Claws will be jeopardized. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Politics is never that simple, as you well know. The question isn't just whether this woman is Isabel, but what her appearance means for the kingdom. Why now, after 15 years of presumed death? Why arrive precisely on my wedding day? You suspect a trap? I suspect nothing and everything. He finally sat, leaning forward with elbows on his knees, closing some of the careful distance I had maintained between us. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence, yet too brazen to be mere manipulation. If the Moonstones wanted leverage, there were subtler ways to gain it than disrupting a royal wedding. I considered this, trying to think like the historian I had once been rather than the wounded lover I remained. What do you know of the Moonstone Pack's current situation? They've maintained strict neutrality since the Purge, Gabriel replied, neither supporting my father's regime nor openly opposing it. When I took the throne, they sent formal congratulations but declined my invitation to join the new Council of Packs. They're self-sufficient, isolated, and intensely private. Not natural allies to the Lost Pack, I mused. The Moonstones were forest dwellers, valley wolves. The Lost Pack were mountain wolves, with entirely different customs and values. Gabriel nodded, a ghost of our old intellectual connection flickering between us. Exactly. There's no clear political advantage for the Moonstones in creating a false Isabel. If anything, presenting her publicly puts them at risk of retaliation from the Silver Claws if the claim is proven false, which suggests they believe she's genuine, I said slowly. Or at least they have compelling evidence. The medallion. The birthmark. Gabriel's eyes searched mine. You're the foremost expert on Lost Pack history, Sophia. Could such things be faked? I considered the question carefully. The medallion, perhaps, though creating a convincing forgery of an enchanted object would require exceptional skill. The birthmark is more difficult. It would need to be in precisely the right location, the exact crescent shape described in historical texts. And if both are authentic, I hesitated, knowing he wouldn't like my answer. Then the probability is high that she truly is Isabel Moonrose. Gabriel stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the gathering dusk. His shoulders formed a tense line beneath his tunic. I was 7 when we were betrothed, he said quietly. I remember very little of her. A small, serious child with pale hair who didn't speak during the ceremony. Our hands were bound with silver cord while the mystics chanted, and we exchanged the medallions. Afterward, there was a feast. She didn't eat, didn't smile. Then she was gone, back to her mountain home, and I never saw her again. You were children, I said softly. The betrothal was political, not personal. Like my engagement to Vivian, he said bitterly. Another arrangement made for the good of the kingdom, without regard for... He broke off, turning to face me. Without regard for matters of the heart. The air between us thickened with unspoken truths. I forced myself to maintain my composure, though my pulse raced wildly. What do you want from me, Gabriel? The use of his name, not his title, hung in the air between us, an intimacy I hadn't allowed myself in 2 years. His eyes darkened, the rigid control he maintained in public slipping just enough for me to glimpse the turmoil beneath. I want you to help me identify her, he said, his voice low and intense, to confirm whether she truly is Isabel. But more than that, I need you to understand why I made the choices I did, why I let you go. Pain lanced through me, sharp and bright. Let me go? Is that what you call it? You abandoned me, Gabriel. One day I was the woman you loved, the woman you bound your heart to under the full moon. The next, I was banished to the scullery without so much as a word of explanation. I had no choice, he said, anguish breaking through his careful mask. Thorn discovered our heart-binding ritual. He threatened to expose your mother's correspondence with Lost Pack refugees, evidence that could have seen you executed for treason. The only way to protect you was to distance myself completely, to make it clear to the council that you held no special place in my affections. I stared at him, shock coursing through me. What? He told me he'd explain the situation to you, Gabriel continued, confusion crossing his features. That you had agreed to the arrangement for your own safety. He told me nothing of the sort, I whispered, anger beginning to burn beneath my shock. He said you had realized an Omega from no recognized pack would destabilize your reign, that you needed a politically advantageous match and had chosen duty over whatever we had shared. Gabriel's expression transformed, rage darkening his features. For a moment, I glimpsed the wolf beneath the man, the apex predator whose territory had been violated, whose mate had been threatened. His eyes flashed alpha gold, his voice dropping to a near growl. He lied to us both. The realization settled over me like ice water. For 2 years, I had nursed my heartbreak in bitter silence, believing Gabriel had discarded me for political convenience. And all that time, he had believed I understood the sacrifice he had made to protect me. Why didn't you try to see me? I asked, my voice small. Even a message. Every time I tried, Thorn arranged some diplomatic crisis that required my immediate attention, Gabriel said, running a hand roughly through his hair. Eventually, I convinced myself distance was safer for you, that my attention would only put you at greater risk. His eyes met mine, filled with self-recrimination. I was a coward, Sophia. I told myself I was protecting you. But in truth, I couldn't bear to see you and not touch you, not claim you as mine. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest in a way we had never been allowed to be. I stood on shaking legs, needing to move, to process the revelation that everything I had believed for 2 years had been built on Thorn's manipulation. And now? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Now Isabel Moonrose returns from the dead, and what? You need my historical expertise to verify her claim, and then we return to our separate lives? You to your throne, me to the scullery? No. The word was sharp, decisive. Gabriel crossed the space between us in 2 strides, standing close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the pine and rain scent that had haunted my dreams for 2 years. Never again, Sophia. Whether this woman is Isabel or not, I won't lose you a second time. Hope flickered in my chest, dangerous and bright. The alliance with the Silver Claws can be maintained through trade agreements and mutual defense pacts, he said firmly. I agreed to marry Vivian because I believed it was the only way to secure lasting peace, and because I believed you understood why I had to let you go. Now I know we were both deceived. Thorn won't accept this easily, I warned, even as my heart raced with possibility. He's built his position on controlling your political alliances. Thorn serves at my pleasure, not the other way around. Gabriel's voice carried the unmistakable authority of the Alpha King. And his days of manipulating either of us are over. The certainty in his voice made something long dormant within me stir to life, the part of my Omega nature that responded to Alpha dominance not with submission, but with a complementary strength. What happens now? I asked softly. Gabriel reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I chose. When I remained still, he gently touched my cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of my face as if memorizing it anew. Now, we prepare to meet the woman who may be Isabel, he said. And whatever her identity, whatever political storms her arrival brings, we face them together. His thumb brushed my lower lip, sending shivers through me. No more secrets between us, Sophia. No more sacrifices made in silence. I wanted desperately to believe him, to fall back into the connection we had shared, but 2 years of pain couldn't be erased with a single conversation, no matter how revelatory. I need time, I whispered, stepping back from his touch, even as every fiber of my being protested the separation. 2 years believing you had discarded me like a convenient political liability. That wound doesn't heal in a moment. Pain flashed in his eyes, but he nodded, respecting the boundary I had set. Time you shall have. But know this, Sophia. He reached for my hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture both courtly and intimate. Our heart binding was no political arrangement. It was the truest choice I've ever made. Before I could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the library. Gabriel released my hand, stepping back with visible reluctance. Enter, he commanded, his voice instantly reverting to its royal timbre. The door swung open to reveal Lord Reed, his expression grave. Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty, but the Moonstone delegation has been sighted approaching the Western Road. They've traveled through the night and will reach the palace within hours. Gabriel's brow furrowed. They weren't expected until tomorrow. Why the change? Unknown, sire. But there's more. Reed hesitated, glancing briefly at me. They travel under a flag of urgent sanctuary, and they're being pursued by Silverclaw forces. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Lady Vivian's family is attacking a diplomatic delegation. It would appear so, Reed confirmed grimly. Our border patrols report at least 30 Silverclaw warriors in pursuit, armed for combat rather than ceremony. Gabriel's expression hardened into the mask of kingship I had seen him don so many times before. Assemble the royal guard, send riders to intercept the Silverclaw forces, and remind them that attacking a delegation under diplomatic protection on royal lands constitutes an act of war. Reed bowed and departed immediately to carry out the orders. Gabriel turned back to me, the tenderness of moments before replaced by strategic focus. The game has changed, he said. Whatever Thorn might have planned, whatever carefully orchestrated political dance he envisioned, the Silverclaws have forced our hand. If they're willing to attack a protected delegation, they never truly sought peace. I nodded, my historian's mind already analyzing the implications. They must believe this woman truly is Isabel, and that her claim threatens their position more than an outright breach of diplomatic protocol. Precisely. Gabriel moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening sky, as if he could already see the approaching conflict. And now I must decide whether to defend a woman who may be a long-lost betrothed I barely remember, potentially triggering war with the most powerful military force in the realm. I joined him at the window, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite the revelations we had shared. What will you do? He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the same combination of strength and thoughtfulness that had first drawn me to him. What my father never could: protect the innocent, uphold our sacred laws, and find a path to true peace rather than momentary political advantage. His gaze softened as it held mine. And I would have you by my side, Sophia, not as a servant, but as the historian and counselor you were always meant to be, if you're willing. The offer represented everything I had once dreamed of, a return to my true calling, a place of respect within the court, and a chance to rebuild what had been shattered between us. Yet caution tempered my hope. And what of Thorn? Of the council who supported removing me from your life? They will accept my decision or face the consequences, Gabriel said simply. I am Alpha King. It's time I remembered what that truly means. A commotion outside drew our attention, the thunder of hoofbeats, the flare of torches. Through the window, I glimpsed royal guards assembling in the courtyard below, preparing to ride out to meet the approaching delegations. I need to join them, Gabriel said, already moving toward the door. He paused, turning back to me with an intensity that made my breath catch. When I return, we will finish this conversation. There is much still to say between us. I'll be here, I promised softly. He nodded once, then was gone, his footsteps echoing down the spiral stairs as he descended to meet whatever fate approached with the Moonstone delegation, and the woman who might be Isabel Moonrose, his long-lost betrothed. I remained at the window, watching as Gabriel mounted his midnight black stallion and led his guard out through the palace gates. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, a fitting backdrop to the political tempest about to break over all our heads. My fingers found my mother's pendant, tracing its familiar contours as I whispered her final advice to me. Remember, little one, an Omega's greatest power is not in submission, but in the strength to stand when others would have you kneel. Tonight, I had stood before my king as an equal for the first time in 2 years. Whatever came next, whoever this mysterious woman proved to be, I would not kneel again. Hours passed like centuries as I waited in the tower library. The sky darkened completely, the storm clouds swallowing the stars and moon. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the distant hills where Gabriel and his guard had disappeared. Each thunderclap made me flinch, my imagination transforming the sound into clashing weapons, the growls of wolves in battle form. I paced the circular room, trailing my fingers along the spines of books that had once been my closest companions. Ancient histories, packed genealogies, treaties, and maps, the collected knowledge that had shaped my understanding of our world. I pulled down a weathered tome on lost pack lineages, searching for any detail about Princess Isabel that might have escaped my memory. But the facts remained the same: a solemn child with silver blonde hair, betrothed to the Blackthorn Prince at age 7, presumed dead in the purge that had claimed her family and pack. A knock at the door startled me from my research. I looked up to find Maya standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Sophia? What are you doing here?" She glanced around the royal library with evident discomfort. "Everyone's looking for you. The domestic staff was ordered to gather in the eastern wing." I closed the book carefully, trying to appear calmer than I felt. "I'm here on the king's orders," I said, which was technically true, even if Gabriel's last command had been more personal than official. Maya's eyes widened further. "So it's true then? The rumors that you've been reinstated as a royal historian?" News traveled quickly in the palace, even in times of crisis. "I don't know what I am anymore," I admitted. "Everything's changing so quickly." She crossed the room to take my hands in hers, her expression earnest. "The guards are saying the king rode out to meet a lost pack princess, that she claims to be his first betrothed, returned from the dead. The Moonstone pack is bringing someone who may be Princess Isabel," I corrected carefully. "Her identity hasn't been confirmed." "And the Silverclaws are in pursuit," Maya continued, lowering her voice as if sharing a terrible secret. "They're saying Lady Vivian collapsed when she heard the news, that she's threatening to summon her father's entire army if the king grants this woman an audience." The situation was deteriorating faster than I'd feared. "Has there been any word from the king's party?" Maya shook her head. "Nothing official. But—" She hesitated. "But what?" "Lord Thorne is gathering forces loyal to him in the West Wing. I heard him telling the captain of the House Guard to prepare for all contingencies if the king returns with the impostor." Ice slid down my spine. Thorne was positioning himself to control the outcome, regardless of what Gabriel decided. The revelation that he had manipulated both Gabriel and me wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was evidence of a deeper political agenda, one that required Gabriel to marry Vivian regardless of other claims or considerations. "I need to get to the throne room," I said, making a swift decision. "That's where the king will bring the delegation when they arrive." Maya looked alarmed. "Sophia, whatever history you had with the king, whatever position you once held, you're still just a servant in their eyes. You'll be removed the moment you try to enter the royal reception areas." She wasn't wrong. Despite Gabriel's words in the library, my official status remained unchanged. The guards wouldn't recognize his private reassurances as a formal reinstatement. I touched the pendant at my throat, an idea forming. "I need your help, Maya, and it might put you at risk." Her expression softened. "You've been my only friend since I came to the palace. Whatever you need." 20 minutes later, I slipped through the servants' entrance to the small antechamber adjacent to the throne room. Maya's uniform fit me poorly. She was shorter and curvier. But in the dimly lit corridors, the simple gray dress was enough of a disguise to avoid immediate questioning. The food cart I pushed provided additional cover, laden with wine and refreshments, for the royal reception. I positioned myself near the hidden observation panel, a small section of wall that could be slid aside, designed to allow servants to monitor the throne room discreetly for signals that their services were required. Through the narrow opening, I could see the vast chamber, empty save for a handful of royal guards stationed at regular intervals. The massive ironwood doors at the far end of the room swung open, and Lord Thorne entered, flanked by several members of the royal council. His face was set in grim lines as he conferred quietly with the others. I couldn't hear their words, but their tense postures spoke volumes. This was no welcoming committee. This was a faction preparing to control a volatile situation. From my hiding place, I watched as more nobles filtered in, gathering in small clusters. The air thrummed with tension, with whispered speculation. Lady Vivian entered last, supported by her lady's maid. She had changed from her wedding gown into a formal court dress of silver-claw blue, her face pale but composed. Whatever collapse had occurred earlier had been temporary or strategic. The atmosphere shifted suddenly as a guard burst through the doors, breathless with urgency. "The king returns," he announced, "with the Moonstone delegation." The assembled nobles straightened, arranging themselves in order of rank and precedence. Thorn moved to stand at the right of the throne, the position of the king's chief advisor, while Lady Vivian took her place to the left, where the royal consort would traditionally stand. Trumpets sounded from the outer courtyard, followed by the thunder of hooves on stone. Minutes stretched into an eternity before the great doors opened once more to admit Gabriel, still in his riding clothes, his cloak damp from the storm that had broken during his journey. His face was a mask of regal composure, but I could read the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in his movements. Behind him came a procession unlike any the palace had seen in living memory. First entered the Moonstone emissaries, 5 warriors in their distinctive silver-gray leathers, their expressions wary but proud. They formed a protective semicircle around the slight figure who followed them into the hall, the woman who might be Isabel Moonrose. Even from my hidden vantage point, I could see why the Moonstones believed her to be the lost princess. She moved with natural grace, her pale blonde hair, almost silver in the torchlight, falling in a long braid over one shoulder. Her face held the ethereal beauty characteristic of the Lost Pack's royal line: high cheekbones, delicate features, eyes of such a pale green they appeared almost translucent. She wore simple traveling clothes of soft leather and wool, unadorned, save for a medallion that glinted gold against her throat. The assembled court collectively held its breath as Gabriel escorted her to the center of the room, the Moonstone guards following at a respectful distance. Lady Vivian's posture stiffened visibly, her hands clasping tightly before her. "My lords and ladies," Gabriel addressed the court, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "I present to you the delegation from the Moonstone Pack, who come under my protection and the ancient laws of diplomatic sanctuary." Murmurs rippled through the assembly at his careful wording. He had acknowledged their protected status without yet confirming or denying the woman's identity. Thorn stepped forward, bowing with perfect courtesy that didn't reach his cold eyes. "The court welcomes the Moonstone delegation." He turned his attention to the pale woman. "And you must be the one who claims to be Princess Isabel Moonrose." A subtle rebuke in his phrasing, "claims to be." But the woman seemed unperturbed. When she spoke, her voice was soft, yet clear, carrying a slight accent I recognized from my research as characteristic of the northern mountain regions. "I make no claims, Lord Thorn," she said. "I simply am who I am, the daughter of Alistair and Alara Moonrose, betrothed in childhood to Prince Gabriel Blackthorn." Her gaze shifted to Gabriel. "Though I see he is prince no longer, but king in his own right." Gabriel inclined his head slightly. "Much has changed in 15 years, my lady." "Indeed." Her pale eyes scanned the assembled court, pausing briefly on Lady Vivian before returning to Gabriel. "Including, it seems, your marital intentions." A tense silence fell. Lady Vivian stepped forward, her composure cracking slightly. "If you are truly who you claim to be," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, "where have you been these 15 years? Why appear now, at this precise moment?" It was the question everyone wanted answered, delivered with the barely restrained accusation many felt. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence, arriving on Gabriel's wedding day, disrupting a political alliance years in the making. The woman who might be Isabel met Vivian's hostility with calm dignity. "I have been in the far north, beyond the borders of the known packs, living among those who escaped the purge. I returned when I learned of King Gabriel's impending marriage, not to prevent it, but to honorably dissolve our childhood betrothal so that he might proceed without the shadow of prior obligation." Her answer surprised me. If she truly sought only to release Gabriel from their betrothal, why had the Silverclaws pursued her delegation with armed forces? Why had her arrival thrown the court into such disarray? Thorn clearly shared my skepticism. "A noble sentiment," he said smoothly. "Yet you travel under Moonstone protection, wearing what appears to be the royal medallion of the Lost Pack. These are not the actions of someone seeking to quietly resolve an outdated arrangement." "The medallion is my birthright," she replied without heat, "and the Moonstones offered their protection when it became clear others wished to prevent my arrival." Her gaze flicked meaningfully toward Lady Vivian, perhaps to avoid the inconvenience of acknowledging that I survived when so many did not. The implication hung in the air that the Silverclaws had known of her existence before this moment, that their attack on her delegation was not a reaction to a perceived threat, but an attempt to silence a truth they had long sought to bury. Gabriel raised a hand, quelling the murmurs that broke out across the court. These are serious matters that require verification, not speculation. Lady Isabel, if that is indeed who you are, claims to possess the royal medallion of the Moonrose line. This can be authenticated. He turned to the assembled court. Is the royal historian present? My heart leapt into my throat. This was my cue. The moment Gabriel had prepared for me during our conversation in the library. He was publicly reclaiming my position, creating the opportunity for me to step forward legitimately. I abandoned my hiding place, slipping through the servants' door into a side corridor that would allow me to enter the throne room properly. As I reached for the handle, a hand clamped over my mouth from behind, another securing my arms. Not so fast, little Omega. Thorne's voice hissed in my ear. Your services won't be required tonight. I struggled against his grip, but he was stronger than his lean frame suggested. A second man appeared, one of Thorne's personal guards, taking hold of my arms as Thorne released me. Take her to my chambers, Thorne instructed the guard. Ensure she remains there until the matter of the princess is resolved. The king asked for the royal historian, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. He'll notice my absence. Thorne smiled coldly. The king will be informed that the position remains vacant following your unfortunate departure. By the time he realizes the deception, the impostor will have been exposed and escorted from the kingdom. She's not an impostor, is she? I challenged, sudden clarity washing over me. You know she's truly Isabel. That's why you're so desperate to prevent her claim from being verified. Something flickered in Thorne's eyes. A moment of calculation before his mask of control slipped back into place. What I know, he said carefully, is that peace between the 7 packs hangs by a thread, and I will not allow it to be severed by ghosts from the past or the king's sentimental attachments. This isn't about peace, I realized aloud. It's about power. Your power, maintained by controlling the king's alliances. Thorne signaled to his guard. Take her, now. The guard began dragging me toward a side corridor, but I wasn't going to be removed so easily this time. I drew a deep breath and let my Omega nature, the part of myself I had suppressed for years to survive, rise to the surface. Gabriel! I screamed, my voice carrying the distinctive harmonic resonance unique to Omegas in distress. It was a primal call that bypassed rational thought, that would reach the Alpha bonded to me regardless of distance or barriers. The guard clamped a hand over my mouth, but it was too late. I had released the cry that no heart-bound Alpha could ignore. The throne room doors burst open, Gabriel appearing in the doorway with eyes blazing alpha gold. His features partially shifted toward his wolf form. Behind him, the court stood frozen in shock at the sight of their king responding to an Omega's call. Sophia, he growled, the name barely recognizable through elongated canines. Thorne stepped between us, hands raised in placation. Your Majesty, please. The servant girl is confused, overexcited by the evening's events. I was having her escorted, dragged, I corrected, wrenching free of the guard's suddenly loosened grip to prevent me from identifying the medallion. Gabriel's gaze locked with mine across the distance separating us, the gold in his eyes slowly receding as he mastered his partial shift. When he spoke again, his voice was human, but carried the unmistakable authority of the Alpha King. Bring her forward. Thorne hesitated, clearly calculating his options and finding them limited. With visible reluctance, he stepped aside. I walked toward Gabriel with my head held high, aware of the court's collective gaze tracking my movement. I no longer wore the fine dresses of my historian days, but a borrowed servant's uniform. Yet something in my bearing must have changed, for whispers followed my progress across the throne room floor. Omega. The word rippled through the assembly like a stone dropped in still water. The king responded to an Omega's call. I reached Gabriel's side, meeting his gaze directly. In his eyes I saw concern, relief, and something fiercer, a promise of reckoning for those who had threatened me. Are you harmed? He asked quietly. No, I assured him. Just delayed. He nodded once, then turned to address the court. Many of you remember Sophia Winters, who served as royal historian before her reassignment. His voice hardened on the last word. his gaze finding Thorn briefly before continuing. Her expertise on the Lost Pack is unparalleled, which is why I specifically requested her presence to authenticate Lady Isabel's claim. Lady Vivian stepped forward, her composure cracking further. A servant girl. This is who you would trust to determine the validity of a claim that threatens our alliance. A royal historian, Gabriel corrected firmly, whose position I am formally reinstating, effective immediately. He turned to me. Sophia, can you authenticate the medallion Lady Isabel wears? All eyes turned to the pale woman who stood watching our exchange with quiet intensity. Around her throat gleamed the golden pendant, shaped like a crescent moon embracing a small star, the ancient symbol of the Moonrose royal line. I approached her slowly, aware that one wrong step in this delicate dance of politics and identity could trigger consequences far beyond the throne room. May I? I asked, gesturing to the medallion. She nodded, lifting the chain over her head and placing the medallion in my palm. The moment the gold touched my skin, I felt a strange warmth emanating from it. Not the normal heat of metal warmed by body temperature, but something deeper, as if the object itself carried an inner fire. I examined it carefully, noting the intricate engravings around the edge, ancient pack runes that spelled out the Moonrose family motto. In darkness, we are the light that guides. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the gold undiminished by time. At the center of the crescent moon, a small catch revealed the medallion's secret nature. It was a locket. I pressed the catch, and the crescent opened to reveal a miniature portrait painted on ivory. A handsome couple with a solemn-faced child between them, all three bearing the distinctive pale coloring of the Lost Pack royalty. Beneath the portrait, inscribed in tiny letters, Alistair, Alara, and Isabel Moonrose, sovereign family of the Northern Heights. It's authentic, I said, looking up to meet Gabriel's gaze. This is the royal medallion of the Moonrose line, commissioned for Princess Isabel's 7th year. A murmur rippled through the court. Lady Isabel, for there seemed little doubt now of her identity, accepted the medallion back with a graceful nod of thanks. There is one more proof, she said quietly, turning to reveal the area behind her right ear. There, visible against her pale skin, was a crescent-shaped birthmark, the royal mark of the Moonrose line, documented in historical texts, but known to few outside scholarly circles. Gabriel stepped forward, studying the birthmark, then the medallion, his expression unreadable. The court held its collective breath, awaiting his verdict. I recognize Isabel Moonrose, rightful princess of the Lost Pack, he finally declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, and acknowledge our childhood betrothal as valid under ancient law. Chaos erupted in the throne room. Lady Vivian let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, her attendants rushing to support her. Lords and ladies broke into urgent whispers, some looking alarmed, others calculating. Through it all, Thorn stood rigidly by the throne, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Gabriel raised a hand, and gradually silence returned. However, he continued, such a betrothal, made between children for political purposes, can be dissolved by mutual consent of both parties upon reaching adulthood. This is also ancient law. He turned to Isabel, who watched him with those eerily pale eyes. Is this your wish, Princess Isabel? To dissolve our betrothal so that we may each follow our hearts rather than childhood obligations? A test. Subtle but unmistakable. If she truly had come, as she claimed, to honorably release him from their betrothal, she would agree immediately. Isabel held his gaze for a long moment before answering. It is my wish to honor the true spirit of our betrothal, Your Majesty. An alliance between our packs that would bring peace and unity to our people. She glanced around the tension-filled throne room. But I sense that such unity may be better achieved through other means than marriage. Relief flickered across Gabriel's features. Then we are of one mind. Our childhood betrothal is hereby dissolved, with gratitude and respect on both sides. He took her hand formally, raising it to his lips in a gesture of courtly respect. And I pledge that the Lost Pack will be restored to its rightful place among the 7 nations, with you as its sovereign. It was a masterful political move, acknowledging Isabel's claim while simultaneously removing the threat to his engagement with Vivian. The court relaxed visibly, crisis apparently averted, but Lady Vivian was not so easily appeased. She stepped forward, her face flushed with emotion. How convenient that this lost princess appears willing to relinquish her claims so readily. One might almost suspect prior arrangement. Isabel turned to her, pale eyes suddenly sharp. You speak of arrangements, Lady Vivian. Yet it was your father's forces that pursued my delegation with weapons drawn. What arrangement demanded my silence so desperately that you would risk war to maintain it? The accusation hung in the air, unanswered. Gabriel turned to Vivian, his expression hardening. An excellent question. One that requires an answer before any talk of marriage can proceed. Vivian's composure cracked completely. You would question me? My loyalty? When you stand before your court with an Omega at your side, responding to her call like a trained hound? The insult struck like a physical blow. Gabriel went utterly still, the temperature in the room seeming to drop several degrees. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. Choose your next words with exceptional care, Lady Vivian. But she was beyond caution now, pushed to emotional breaking point by the events of the day. Everyone sees it. The way you look at her, the way you responded to her cry. You never intended to honor our engagement. You've been bound to this. This servant, all along. Whispers erupted throughout the court. Speculation that had simmered beneath the surface for years, suddenly brought into the open. I stood frozen, feeling the weight of hundreds of stares, the judgment and curiosity washing over me in waves. Sophia Winters was royal historian before she was a servant, Gabriel said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that silenced the whispers immediately. Her reassignment was the result of manipulation and threats by those who sought to control the crown through me. His gaze found Thorne, who had gone deathly pale. A deception that ends today. He turned to me then, his eyes softening as they met mine. In them, I saw a question, and the absolute certainty that whatever choice I made, he would accept it. I took a deep breath, touching the pendant at my throat one last time. My mother's words echoed in my memory. An Omega's greatest power is not in submission, but in the strength to stand when others would have you kneel. It was time to stand, not just for myself, but for Omegas everywhere who had been treated as commodities rather than equals. 2 years ago, I said, my voice clear and steady, the king and I performed the heart-binding ritual under the full moon. We are bonded by choice and by love, in the tradition of our ancestors who recognized that true strength comes from unity, not domination. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. The heart-binding ritual was sacred, rarely performed in modern times, a commitment deeper than political marriage, recognized by pack law as irrevocable. Gabriel stepped to my side, taking my hand in his. I have honored my duty to the kingdom by seeking alliances that would bring peace, he said, addressing the stunned court. But I will no longer deny the bond that exists between myself and Sophia, a bond that was hidden not by choice, but by threat and manipulation. Lord Thorne pushed forward, desperation evident in his normally controlled demeanor. Your Majesty, I implore you to consider the consequences. The Silverclaws will not accept. The Silverclaws, interrupted a new voice, have much to answer for regarding their pursuit of a protected delegation. All eyes turned to Isabel, who stood with quiet dignity in the center of the throne room. My journey here uncovered evidence that the purge was not solely the work of the previous king, but a coordinated effort between the Crown and the Silverclaw Pack to eliminate the Lost Pack and seize our northern territories. A gasp echoed through the hall. If true, this revelation would rewrite our understanding of recent history and place the Silverclaw's current machinations in a far more sinister light. This is outrageous slander, Lady Vivian cried, but her protest lacked conviction. The color had drained from her face, suggesting she was not entirely ignorant of her family's past actions. Evidence exists in the royal archives, Isabel continued steadily. Documents that were suppressed after the purge. Documents that I believe your mother was researching before her sudden reassignment. Her gaze met mine, understanding passing between us. The same research that likely led to your discovery as an Omega and your subsequent removal from the king's side. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. My mother's correspondence with Lost Pack refugees, my own research into inconsistencies in the official purge narrative, my relationship with Gabriel that had given me access to classified archives, all had threatened to expose a conspiracy that extended back a generation. Is this true? Gabriel demanded, turning to Thorne, whose composure had finally shattered completely. "Everything I did was for the stability of the kingdom," Thorn insisted, desperation evident in his voice. "The alliance with the Silverclaws was necessary to maintain peace. The Omega would have destabilized everything with her questions, her research into matters better left buried." His admission echoed through the silent hall. In those few sentences, he had confirmed both his manipulation of Gabriel and me and the existence of the very conspiracy Isabel had alleged. Gabriel's expression was terrible to behold. The cold rage of an alpha whose trust had been betrayed, whose mate had been threatened. "Guards," he commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "Arrest Lord Thorn for treason against the crown." As the royal guards moved to surround Thorn, Lady Vivian backed away, clearly calculating her own precarious position. "Your Majesty," she began, but Gabriel cut her off with a raised hand. "Lady Vivian, you and your family will return to your territories immediately. Whether our nations remain at peace or descend into war depends entirely on your father's willingness to answer for his actions, both past and present. Choose your path carefully." She hesitated, pride warring with pragmatism, before offering a stiff curtsy. "As you wish, Your Majesty." With a final glare in my direction, she swept from the throne room, her attendants scrambling to follow. As the doors closed behind her, Gabriel turned to address the assembled court. "Tonight has revealed truths long buried and bonds long denied. I stand before you now with honesty rather than political calculation. I am bound by heart ritual to Sophia Winters, and I recognize Isabel Moonrose as the rightful princess of the Lost Pack, which shall be restored to its place among the 7 nations. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembly. "Those who cannot accept these truths are free to depart. Those who remain will help build a kingdom founded on justice rather than conquest, on truth rather than convenient lies." A moment of silence followed his declaration. Then slowly, the oldest member of the council, Lord Cedric, who had served 3 generations of Blackthorn kings, stepped forward and knelt. "The Alpha King has spoken," he said, his aged voice carrying surprising strength. "And his chosen mate stands beside him. Long may they reign." One by one, the lords and ladies of the court knelt in acknowledgement, their previous shock giving way to the pragmatic acceptance of those who had survived centuries of political upheaval. By tomorrow, new alliances would be forming, new calculations made, but for tonight, at least, the truth had prevailed. Gabriel turned to me, taking both my hands in his. "No more secrets," he said softly, echoing his promise from hours earlier in the library. "No more sacrifices made in silence." "No more," I agreed, my heart so full I could barely speak. He smiled then. Not the careful smile of diplomacy he showed the court, but the real smile I had fallen in love with years ago. "My historian, my mate, my queen." Around us, the court watched with varying degrees of surprise, calculation, and, from some of the older members, something close to approval. Change had come to the kingdom, swift and irrevocable. As Gabriel leaned forward to seal our reconciliation with a kiss that broke all remaining protocols of court behavior, I caught sight of Isabel Moonrose watching us, a small smile playing at her lips. She had come seeking justice for her lost pack, and found an ally in the most unexpected place, in another Omega, who had refused to kneel when others demanded her submission. The pendant at my throat grew warm against my skin, as if my mother's spirit approved of the path I had chosen. In that moment, surrounded by the swirling currents of political intrigue and standing firm in the love I had thought forever lost, I finally understood the full meaning of her final words to me. An Omega's greatest power isn't found in traditional strength or dominance, but in the courage to stand for truth when lies would be easier, to choose love when fear would be safer, to reclaim your rightful place in a world determined to define your worth by your designation alone. I had found that power at last. And with Gabriel's hand in mine, and the promise of a new beginning spreading before us like the first rays of dawn after the longest night, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I would never let it go again.